Welcome, patrons. Let us continue on with more of the Elven Pantheon, focusing in on Falon'Din, god of the dead. The myth. The Dalish believe that Falon'Din was the god of death, as in he brings the souls of the dead to the beyond, and also the god of fortune. And real quickly, because it'll come up a lot, remember that the word beyond in the Elven culture means the Fade. They believe their spirits rest deep within the Fade when they die, so Falon'Din is the god to help guide them on the path to the deep Fade. This is also a bit of a holdover from when the elves were immortal and would go into Euthenera rather than die. Anyway, now like I mentioned in the Durthamin video, a lot of stories of Falon'Din also include Durthamin, his twin, so a lot of this information is going to be the same if you have already watched the Durthamin video. That being said, there's also a lot of new information because there's actually more in Falon'Din than there is of Durthamin. So, with all that out of the way, Falon'Din and his brother Durthamin were the eldest children of Elgernod and Mythal. Both were said to be inseparable from each other, starting when they were kids. The one time they were separated from each other ends up being a very notable story on how Durthamin gains two raven friends, but also on how Falon'Din discovered what he would later be known for. As the story goes, when they were children playing in the woods, they found a sickly deer. They wanted to play with the deer, but it was too weak, so kind Falon'Din picks up the deer and takes it to rest beyond the veil. He ends up going so far and so deep into the Fade that his brother loses him for quite a while. Durthamin does eventually catch up, but more importantly, seeing the deer freed from her sickly body and able to dance around in the Fade makes Falon'Din vow to become the guide of all the dead to their place in the beyond, as well as swear to never be apart from his brother Durthamin again. So then, the Dalish believed that when they were immortal, he would take the elders on trips of enlightenment while they were in Euthenera, and when they were able to die, he carried the souls of the dead deep into the Fade instead. Or at least he did. Now that their gods are locked away by Fen'Harel, the elves are forced to bury their dead with an oaken staff so they will not falter on the path without a guide. But despite Falon'Din and the rest of the elven gods being locked away, the Dalish still invoke his name on their deathbeds, or during events where they think they'll never return. Some Dalish even refer to him as the Merciful One. There's also a bow in Dragon Age Origins that describes that death is sometimes referred to as Falon'Din's Reach. His sacred animal is the owl, although the Dalish can't seem to agree on if the animal is his companion or what he can transform into. This is actually an interesting fact, as this is also an animal known to be the messenger of Andruil, which we will get to more when we get into her. But in one Dalish tale, it talks about how Falon'Din wanted someone to be his messenger and companion. He did not wish to chain the wind. The elves were loyal but could not live where he walked. But then the owl came to him, saying that it was not scared of the dark, and neither was Falon'Din. So he took the bird to help guide the people through the veil. There is also a constellation named Tenebrium, or Shadow, which is of an owl. It is thought that this was originally a constellation to honor Falon'Din, but what is cool about this constellation over many of the others is that this is one of the only codex entries that connects an old god with an elven god. In this case, this constellation also represents Lusicon, which I'll go over him in another video. There is also the Strange Ruins in DAO, which look both human and elven in origin. In the ruins is a statue that Tamlin refers to as Falon'Din. It's weird looking with strange wings and kind of creepily long arms. There are other statues in Thedas that show him as a normal pointing figure and others as just an owl. The reality. To start, I think if we want to crack at the reality of Falon'Din, we should start with the one account we have of a person who has probably met him, Solus. If we take him along during the What Pride Had Wrought questline and examine some of the murals in the Temple of Mythal, he will add his snarky commentary. This is what he says for Falon'Din.
I do not believe they sing songs about Falon'Din's vanity. It is said Falon'Din's appetite for adulation was so great, he began wars to amass more worshippers. The blood of those who wouldn't bow low filled lakes as wide as oceans. Mythal rallied the gods once the shadow of Falon'Din's hunger stretched across her own people. It was almost too late. Falon'Din only surrendered when his brethren bloodied him in his own temple.
Depending on what you say in response to that, Solus also says,
"No story is dramatic if the people in it act sensibly."
Yes, most tales paint Falon'Din's stubbornness second only to his self-regard.
In the same area is a codex entry. The people swore their lives to Falon'Din, who mastered the dark that lies, whose shadows hunger, whose faithful sing, whose wings of death surround him, thick as night. Let Thanavir, Master Scryer, be our guide, through shapeless worlds and airless skies. What's interesting about this, minus honestly everything, because shapeless world, airless skies, master scryer, wings of death surround him thick as night, dark that lies, none of this makes sense. But in this same temple is another song to Elgar'nan that asks for him to bring some sort of winged death onto their enemies. Is this referring to Falon'Din, who does have wings of death, apparently? We should also focus on his scrying, which means that apparently he was known to find hidden knowledge and foretelling the future, which really sounds more like Dirthaman's cup of tea. So perhaps that's interesting because of his relationship with Dirthaman, god of secrets. There was another codex entry found in the Vera D'Thara of Falon'Din and Elgar'nan getting into such a heated argument that they were on the brink of war until Mythal stepped in to let champions decide who won the debate. The entry describes two warriors, one in gold and one in black, fighting in the snow. The entry doesn't tell us who represents who, but I think we can assume that the one in black is Falon'Din's, and he also loses the battle. And finally, another thing I mentioned in the Dirthaman video, Falon'Din and Dirthaman have a unique relationship. While described as twin brothers by the Dalish, a study done by Arlay found ancient texts that refer to them as twin souls, something not romantic or familial, but something beyond a strong friendship. In fact, the ancient texts would not describe either by their name, but rather Dirthaman as Falon'Din's reflection and Falon'Din as Dirthaman's shadow. So we keep seeing shadow pop up again and again and again, and I don't know what it means. The theory. I feel like there's a lot to cover in this, and a lot that I can even think of, but I don't even know if it's worth mentioning. There are so many ideas here that don't really connect with one another almost, to the point where I don't know what to do with a lot of this. But let's start with some things I think I can talk about in some depth. So let's start with Falon'Din's first appearance in the series, as a strange statue in the Dalish opening. Tamlin's theory is that the ruins were human, but that the elven people who lived there were their slaves and worshipped Falon'Din. We don't know if that is true, but the place does seem dedicated to him, and evil, which confuses Tamlin, but doesn't confuse us now in the future that we know the elven gods were evil, but there you go. And if you play the Dalish opening, this is also where we find the Tainted Alluvion, the same one that Merrill would have later in Dragon Age 2. So I feel like the question we need to be asking is if this mirror belonged to Falon'Din. Perhaps, unlike the other alluvions that led to other places and bubbles of reality in Thedas, these alluvions led somewhere deep into the Fade, maybe strange places. Maybe shapeless worlds and airless skies. Maybe Falon'Din was the one to even create these bubbles of reality. Let's also jump back to what Sola says about him. What's interesting about that is almost none of that story has any reflection of what we know in the Dalish legends, perhaps minus all the death involved. Did he become known as the god of death because he killed so many? Was the idea of Falon'Din carrying you into the beyond supposed to instill fear into others? When Mythal rallied the gods, who did she rally? And which one of them bloodied him in his own temple? Further, if one day we need to figure out who killed Mythal, this sounds like a very strong motive for Falon'Din, the man she embarrassed in his own temple. And that, dear patrons, is all that I have on Falon'Din. Do you still have lingering questions, proof that I'm wrong? Comments about your own fan theory. Feel free to tweet me at Gildathon on Twitter or send a PM to user Gillanon on Reddit. Dress your all.